64 today, and I have Lucy Vignola, who is a coactive coach, event producer, and permaculture passionate, with me today. So welcome to the show, Lucy. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here.
It's great to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to this one. We're going to be talking about the idea that you should do what you know, and I do feel like this is sometimes sage advice that I just don't take, but I also find it really frustrating when we do the same thing over and over again, and kind of it doesn't work. It doesn't do anything, and so much of my interest is in innovation and change that like this idea of just sticking to what you know feels like that's not always good advice. Sometimes it's
actually,
really so.
Yeah, where we are is that things aren't working anymore in doing them the same way.
Exactly. And I think this idea of we know we kind of better the devil you know kind of thing just gets us in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So yeah, so in case you happen to be new to the show, Delightful Dissent is a shared exploration of something that people kind of take for granted, that doesn't get talked about very much, it gets a bit overlooked. And it came about through my work talking to people taking pioneering different approaches to big, complex, messy things. And Lucy is very much one of these people. So I'm very happy to have you on the show, Lucy. And I found that, a lot of doing this work, we land on these hidden barriers that are in these implicit things that don't really come to the surface. They're in the deeper assumptions. And I really wanted to start challenging some of those. So I hope this show gives you some ideas in the audience about some specific things about the topic that we're talking about today that can help you in perhaps your professional life or your personal life. But more importantly, I really hope it gives you some ideas about how you might challenge some assumptions yourself. Because ultimately I'd like everyone to be able to do this, and I'd like this to be a normal part of what we all do. And it's called Delightful Dissent because we might be disagreeing with conventional wisdom, or perhaps even with each other, but it's not about proving yourself right at everyone else's expense. It's about kind of having a bit of a playful exploration of alternative possibilities. And the show is genuinely live, so please do bear with us if there are any technical issues or interruptions. And please be aware that we may be talking about some topics that you might find a little challenging or difficult. Those are likely to be today around expertise and expert mistakes in particular, and the harm that can come from them perhaps, around uncertainty, and around the climate emergency in particular. And do be aware that we may use strong language. So if that's an issue for you, then please know that that's a possibility. There aren't any perfect answers here. It's about exploring and asking questions. And if you are watching live, then please do ask questions in the chat and we'll try and bring them in and make them part of the conversation. That would be fantastic. If you are listening to or watching the recording, then I'll be sharing more information about how you can get in touch with either of us at the end of the show. So I first met Lucy, I think it was through the Happy Startup School. We first got chatting, but I was really struck when we had a conversation by the kind of grounded, kind yet straightforward approach that Lucy takes, particularly to the complex and messy stuff. So I really wanted to get her on the show, and I'm really glad you could join us today. So yeah, could I ask you perhaps to introduce yourself a little bit, the kind of work that you do, perhaps the kind of people that you like to work with, please?
So I'm Lucy Vignola. I have been doing events for most of the first part of my work life. Then I retrained to be a life coach because I needed to shift my way of working, having kids and working from home, so I couldn't be doing traveling. And then I got back into events, and then woven through all of that was this starting to become aware and connected to what was happening with the climate. Spent some time in Findhorn Eco-Village and got completely immersed in sustainability, permaculture. And so I've been passionate about that and curious about it, writing about it, reading about it. But for up until now, the worlds of my work and my passion were not quite woven together. And then through working with the Happy Startup School, found the way through to connect it all. And so where my work and coaching was taking me to helping people find the work that they were born to do, or the work that they are most drawn to and most have most gifts and talents for, I've actually now helping people to find their way through how to apply that into working in support of the climate emergency and in service of it. And so
Thank you.
Yeah,
it feels like there's a really interesting connection there, the kind of permaculture principles of giving stuff the systemic support it needs, essentially, but also supporting it in how it is, rather than some idealized version of that, and how that relates to what you were talking about and how you work with people.
Yeah. And if you look at the principles of permaculture, and if we applied the principles of permaculture to life in general, and permaculture works with an entire system, and all of the elements of the system have a job to do or are useful in every capacity, we work with things in how they work naturally, and so things are working within the ecosystem in their most natural way, and you allow things to thrive, but allowing things to thrive, they naturally find their way of working together. Working very much on the edges is where there's life and creativity and things get produced. And I find it really fascinating that if we applied more of those principles to how we, because we are essentially part of nature, we are an ecosystem, we are part of the ecosystem. And so when we consider ourselves as part of it, if we operated a bit more in a natural rhythm, then I'm curious about what might happen to us all, and that it might be a really positive and productive way of society operating.
Absolutely. And I think this idea that we're kind of separate from nature,
yeah,
it's such a weird one, and it's so pervasive, actually.
Yeah.
But if we are kind of, the idea of the separation almost drives us apart and drives us to do more harmful things, that we can't separate ourselves. It's like fundamentally it's a fallacy. Humans are no less natural than anything else on the planet. So what we do is no less natural on some level. It's just, is it helpful, rather than this idea of separating us from everything else,
from nature's rhythm. And how we live now is so unnatural. We're so disconnected from seasons, from natural day and night, from how the rhythm, the way the earth, the way that nature's rhythm, it has a rhythm, and it has a natural flow, and uptime and aliveness time and growth, and then there's downtime and wintering. And if we maybe for me, is it possible that for example, part of the reason why there's a lot more stress in the world, and there's a lot more people are feeling that disconnection, is because we are living in such a completely disconnected way from nature itself. And
and it almost needs a disconnection from the self to be able to do that. It's like, I think, and people feel that on a lot of levels. It's a difficult thing, and that so I think
what society demands of us in that way, of that the 9 to 5 and get up in the morning and, you know, working constantly and, you know, not allowing time for rest and creativity and play and all of those things which are important for, you know, important for feeding ourselves and feeding what the system needs.
Absolutely. So before we actually jump into the assumption too much, I do like to ask people to share a quote. Have you got something that you'd like to share with us?
Funnily enough, it speaks to this exactly. Okay. My quote is, normal is getting dressed in clothes that you buy for work, driving through traffic in a car that you're still paying for in order to get to a job that you need so you can pay for the clothes, car and the house that you leave empty all day in order to afford to live in it. That's by Ellen Goodman.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that quote because it's just like, you know, yes, this is the norm. This is the rhythm that we've all become used to, and we've all, it's the you know, we've all colluded with the assumption that that's the correct way of doing things, and actually, it's, you know, doesn't make sense.
Mm.
But to do things differently is controversial, or, you know. And also, you know, necessity. We live in a system where actually, you know, you have to go to work, you have to pay your bills, you have to pay your mortgage, you have to cover your costs, you have to, you know, so.
I think this idea of the system, you know, and like how it all fits together but doesn't really work is a really interesting one. I realized this a while back when I was working in technology, and that's not a poorly compensated field. It's, you know, it's well paid by the standards of an awful lot of work, and yet it felt very precarious somehow. And I realized it's because all of it fits together. You know, it's like you kind of need these other things to support you in the stuff. It's like if you do this kind of work that's disconnected, you need to be able to have access to the work and to be able to kind of have, weirdly, to be socially accepted in those spaces. And you need the foreign holidays, long haul holiday, and that's not sustainable. That's called, you know, but it all fits together or it doesn't. And it's actually very hard to take aspects of the thing without the whole thing. And it feels that there's something really interesting in that the whole space is known. It all fits together well. You know, it's like, and how do you feel that, you know, that your quote relates to this idea of doing what you know and the need to do what you know?
Doing what you know, and you know, it's the same as doing what's expected, you know. And so I think, generalization, obviously, there are many people doing things differently and choosing a different path and choosing an alternative path. But in the main, my experience has been that, you know, people follow that flow of what's expected of you in terms of, you know, you go to university, you get a job, you start to follow a career path, your career is set out for you. If you know, as you go from one job, it's expected to then go to a better job in the same path. Otherwise, you are potentially damaging your whole, you know, it doesn't look good on my CV, for example. And so it's an expected path. You're doing what you think you should be doing. And quite often it works for some, obviously. But quite often what I see around me is that people following that path sort of get to a point where they're like, hang on a second, I did everything I was supposed to do. I did everything that I thought I was meant to do. you know, I was doing what I know to do, because that's what I'm told is what I had to do. And yet I'm here at this point, and now what? I'm
Mm.
not, you know, am I fulfilled? Some yes, many not. Am I, you know, where am I? What now? What now?
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that more and more people are, it's that question of, you know, why are we here? What is it that fulfills me? What is it that how do I want to live my life? How do I want to feel? So yeah, I think that this doing what we know is this expected chain of events through life to get us to this point of success, you know. But you know, where we are now is our notion of success, our notion of our definition of success is actually changing and evolving, and especially because of where we are now with what's happening, you know, the world is changing, and where success has equaled, you know, the car, the house, the career path, it's not necessarily fitting with, it's like it's an outdated model, I think. For me, it's an
Mm.
outdated notion. um,
And for me, there's something really interesting in this relationship, in the word "no" here. You know, and what we mean by "no," because it feels like when we talk about this, it's a very heady kind of knowing.
mm,
It's very much logical. It's
mm,
like the practical, pragmatic, expedient thing to do, versus a different kind of knowing, a different kind of more of a felt sense,
instinctive.
an instinctive, intuitive
Mm,
experience. And that often, you know, I think there's a kind of conflict that arises. And actually, very often we talk about, you know, when we're talking about the difficulties that come with this, it's there's like, well, I kind of know on some level, or kind of sense on some level, that this
mm,
isn't what I want to be doing. This isn't
mhm,
where I'm being led to act.
mm,
But yet I know on an intellectual level, it's the correct thing to be doing. It's what I should be doing. And I won't get into trouble for doing it. I think this is one of the big things.
yeah,
It's like, if I do this thing everyone else does, this accepted thing, and it goes
and
right,
following the
great,
path.
great, I get what I want.
Yeah,
If it goes wrong, I'm going to get sympathy and support. No one's going to blame me. I did what I was supposed to do.
mm-hmm,
Whereas if I do something different,
mm,
it's somehow on me
mm.
in a very different way.
Well, you took the risk.
Exactly.
It's on you. It's true. And that sense of, you know, often in coaching we call it dissonance, which is that, you know, when someone comes to that place of like, yeah, logically here I'm supposed to be feeling this way, but actually here I'm feeling completely different. And so
Mm,
that there's that gap of like, and that's this, you know, that's actually the point for me of um, when people decide to start to question where they are and potentially start to grow the courage to take a different path and to, you know, take a path that's more coming from here,
mm,
because that feeling of that dissonance is that gap is like, this doesn't work. Yeah, I'm being told, and you know, intellectually I'm supposed to be here, and everything's supposed to be great, and yet it isn't. um and so, yeah, but you're right, it takes courage, because if you want to follow a different path, or you want to, you know, you know, yeah, you want to follow a different path, you want to put on the brakes and go, hang on a second, I'm claiming my life for me. That takes a lot of courage to do things differently. And like you say, many people around, it isn't supportive. It's just like, are you sure? You know, you've come this far, you've built your, you know, let's take career as the example, although it can apply to many different things. But you know, you've taken your career to this point. You know, you move now. You completely change your path. You're taking a risk. All of that's going to waste, although it never is, because for me, I think you're always collecting. You're collecting skills. You're collecting talents. You're collecting experience, which is always, can be applied everywhere. So,
And it feels like when we talk about a lot of this, and the external advice, the stuff that's proven, is like, okay, this happened and then that happened, and that's we rely on a lot of that. That's not a bad thing. And there are there's a lot of really good evidence around that, and expertise, and we can engage with people who can tell us, okay, if you do that, you'll probably get this. I think what's interesting for me is, first of all, how reliable that really is in a changing environment, and how much we can say about whether that's going to work, and also whether that's something we actually want. We can be pretty confident about output,
yeah.
But is it going to lead to the outcome that we want? Is it actually going to make us feel what we want to feel, experience what we want to experience? And I think for me, a lot of this stuff is like, great, well, if I do this and I get that material thing, I get that situation, we're actually really bad at predicting whether that's actually going to feel good or satisfy us in some other way. It's one of the weird pieces of research is how bad people are at predicting what's going to make them happy. We think we're really good at it.
It depends on the individual, right? It depends on the individual. It depends on, for me, when you saying to me, this is going to happen as a result of you doing this is going to happen. To me, that's like a red flag to a bull. I'm like, just let me try that out for myself, because maybe it won't. And that's probably because I'm quite stubborn. But also, I don't like the restriction of that, this is always the outcome. This happens in this way, and therefore it's always the outcome. But what if it isn't? There are so many variables. And imagine if you try that one time and that isn't the outcome, and it becomes something completely different. And the possibilities that come from that. For me, when we open ourselves to possibility, anything can happen. And what if it was this? Just imagine, rather than, I feel, when we shut down possibility by predicting outcomes for other people. And you shut down, it takes away from people that sense, rather it speaks to fear, because, taking risk is taking risk. We all have fear of taking risk for so many different reasons. And generally speaking, if we're on the cusp of potentially trying something new, and someone says, well, this has happened before and this was the outcome. So many times people will step back from that and go, okay, do you know what, now, because it's the excuse to not do it, because it's, it speaks to fear. But actually, if we turned around that language for people and came, especially where we are now and in the world, and the way that things have been done up until now no longer work on many levels. This is clear, on many different levels in society and planet and everything. And actually now we need to be shifting the language much more to possibility, to entrepreneurial energy of like, give it a go. Who knows?
And I think this is, there's something really interesting here for me around pluralities, and the idea that what is homogenous. It's like, okay, there's a fixed way to live a life, to do a thing, and that has all sorts of problems in all sorts of directions, but it's really baked into a lot of this. Do what you know. It's like, okay, this worked for me, and therefore if it doesn't work for you, there's something wrong with you. Rather than with and it's that there's something quite deep in this idea that we almost, other people need, maybe we have some kind of emotional need that what has worked for us works for other people too. But that doesn't necessarily have to be true. It can still, it's like, can we not trust our own validation that it works for us? And this is particularly true for me, with neurodiversity and with the understanding that my experiencing of the world is quite different to a lot of people's. And that means that I enjoy some things other people don't, and really don't enjoy some things other people do. So in terms of outcomes, actually what I'm looking for could be quite different.
Exactly.
And what I enjoy could be quite different. And it's interesting with the risk thing. I often I like to separate risk and uncertainty as preferences or drives and as domains. So risk is quantifiable. It's like uncertainty doesn't have a constrained outcome. It's much less known. But we often lump the two together. Kind of, and for me, because I have quite a low risk appetite for like standard for quantifiable risk. I'm really quite careful. I don't enjoy gambling. Gambling's a risk. It's, there's odds and whatever. Roller coasters are a risk. There's like a set of constraints whereas for me, it's like uncertainty. I can't get enough of it.
Okay.
I really love uncertainty, and I need to be exploring. I need to be, and if I don't get that, I really suffer. And often it feels like for a lot of people, there's actually that's different. Not everyone has that need. Some people have a much higher risk appetite, and so like, what do we need out of what we're getting? And the other part of that, which fits so well with the permaculture idea for me, is that those needs can be mutually beneficial.
Yeah.
One thing on some level, just looking after itself benefits a whole load of other things.
Well, because if the thing is where it's meant to be, it's thriving, right? So if we are where we're meant to be because it's feeding us in some way, or the thing is being fed in some way because it's where it's meant to be, it's thriving. And so anything naturally that's thriving is going to, other things around it, whether that's other people or other things growing, it's going to feed off it because that thing is thriving, feeding the earth back into it, nutrients back in. Person thriving feeds other people around them through their energy, through their enthusiasm, so and what you talk about, the fact that doing things that are, certain aspects of it speak to you that don't necessarily speak to somebody else, and the same for other people. That comes down to us understanding our values and the things that are really important to us, and actually that knowing our values and knowing that these are the elements of, these are my building blocks. If we look at values like building blocks, so these are my building blocks, this is what I'm made of, these are the foundations upon which I stand, which hold me, which feed me. And my building blocks are different to your building blocks and to the next person. And if we all really get to know what our building blocks are, number one, it helps us to understand, okay, these are the things that I need to make me, feel alive. But actually, it helps us understand the differences between each other and accept the differences and accept the diversity. And therefore, it's like, truly living and let living, because it's like, okay, Matthew thrives on uncertainty and needs to have that. Okay, so him doing this thing, you doing that thing because you get uncertainty, that feeds you. Someone else needs security, and whatever their definition of security is, or someone else needs, I don't know, whatever another one would be, freedom, and again, what their definition is. And if we are all feeding those elements of ourselves with what we're doing, or through our work, through the way that we live, we're honoring those values in ourselves. We're allowing ourselves to thrive. We're in our natural environment. And when we're in our natural, we all know when, how it feels when we're in flow, when we're completely like feeling top of our game, you're in the zone, you're feeling like you're doing your best work, or you're you're being your best self, or you're really kind of zinging with kind of all the energy, and you know what you give to people around you when you're in that place, you know, of thriving.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to bring in this comment from Anne Collis. She said, curiosity is so undervalued. It doesn't work for you. How interesting. I wonder why. I wonder what might.
There you go.
And I think for me, it's also really interesting to apply that to oneself. You know, this idea of being curious about ourselves and our own needs. And this doing what you know is not curiosity. It's you know, when we get stuck in that loop, and it's being willing to explore at the edges and to try stuff out. So I think there's something really interesting in that, and that, you know, this relationship to curiosity and the exploration.
I love curiosity. That idea of just bringing curiosity into the conversation, whether it's with ourselves or with the people around us. If you replace, you know, having curiosity removes judgment, because rather than judging someone else as doing something differently and judging it, being curious about it is like, wow, I wonder what that's about and why. It's got a spaciousness around it. And again, for ourselves, being curious about about anything that's coming up for us, about I'm curious to explore that channel, or I'm curious why I get that reaction to that thing. Is that speaking to a value or not? Like that self-exploration, again, is that opportunity for us to really get to know ourselves well and understand ourselves. What makes me tick? You know, what makes me feel alive? What makes me feel depleted? And that it's like a testing, constantly experimentation, to then find our groove of where we feel most, where we feel well, where we feel that we're thriving.
Absolutely. And it feels like quite a lot of this is around context. You know, it's what contexts work, because we often seem to forget that with the do what you know, is when we're talking about changing situations and complex systems, we can't really be like, you know, a little while ago on the show, we talked about best practice. And it feels like it's something quite similar in this, really, you know, this idea of like, okay, this is what you should always do. It's like, how reliable can we say that really is? And instead being able to think about the effect of all of the different things in the space and how they all play together, you know, and work together. Because it feels like a lot of this is okay, we can be clear kind of what this does in context, and we can understand what context supports that, it doing that or us doing that. And so it becomes more around creating a situation where the kind of things we want to happen emerge, are more likely to happen just through the way that things work together, rather than having to kind of construct everything and predict everything and strictly control everything.
Yeah, because again, that's where that leaves no room for curiosity when outcomes are predicted and set out and expected. And actually, you know, as I said before, the way that the world is, we are in a time now where we need innovation. We need new ways of doing things. We need to have the freedom. We need to give ourselves the freedom. We need to give other people the freedom to explore doing things differently, because we are in an emergency with where we are, with where we're going with the planet. And we need to be doing things differently, and we don't have the answers right now, and we don't have one solve all. So we all need innovation. The world needs innovation, which needs curiosity. It needs experimentation. It needs to be allowing people to do not what they know, but to take completely random tangents from where they are in order to experiment, in order to try, and be allowed to fail and be allowed to take that turn and reach a dead end and then take another one. And, how do we support that in society? How do we support that in each other to allow for that different way of doing things? Right now, doing what we know is still, doing things differently is still considered risky. Like you said, it's taking risks. So how do we change that from being a risk to, okay, it's exploring things with uncertainty, but how do we support that?
Yeah, and I think there are certain things we do, this reliance on doing what we know feels like it makes it, it makes doing this harder than it needs to be, costlier than perhaps it needs to be. They're not kind of costs inherent in doing the thing. They're ways that, because we think about it certain ways, because we think that people should do what they know, that if they don't, effectively we punish people for it.
Yeah. So, and even if we punish them even just with the fact that society doesn't support it, so they there isn't that encouraging energy around that to a degree. The entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurial spirit has, I think, become a lot more prevalent in the last, I don't know, let's say 5-10 years, and there's that, well, again, it's context and it's personal experience. For me, I see a lot of people around me who are in that world and trying and exploring. And so I guess for me, I experience it slightly differently in that I see encouragement and I see possibility to explore, but it's still considered risky, Yeah,
it does feel difficult, precarious, more difficult than it needs to be. As someone who's doing similar, really.
Well, the bottom line is because society doesn't support it. So we still have, the structure is that you've got to, be earning your money to cover your costs and everything. And so there isn't anything around that in society that supports starting a new business, for example, when people have ideas.
Certainly not the kind of exploratory stuff we're talking about. It's like a proven business model. Great. Okay. Proven. It's like what we're saying is actually we need some space for stuff that isn't yet proven.
Exploration.
And
that used to have go on.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether we have very little space for that structurally. And the difficulty then is that it only falls to people with a significant amount of social privilege to be able to do this at all. And I am aware, I'm talking about myself to some level. I'm aware other people can't do this. And I think that's part of the, first of all, there's some guilt. I have some guilt around that. And I think it would be helpful to let that go because it's, it's appropriate for anyone to be, just because I can do this and other people can't, doesn't mean it's not a helpful thing to be able to do. But there's also being aware of that and making the path easier and supporting other people to open up that space. So yeah, I definitely think there are kind of some internal barriers to this as well, and to that relationship between like what we can do in creating the space.
Yeah, and I think it comes down to, I think how to, like you were saying before about how when we were speaking before about how you help other people is based on, where you want to help most yourself, and how you apply what you want to do is relevant to the context that you're in, And so for me, I've got 2 kids, young kids, and the approach that where I think about this is like how do we shift things, for example, this as an example, if because what you're talking about is a paradigm shift in terms of this shifting from following a path of doing what we know and what that expected path is, and shifting the paradigm to a world where there's more the capacity to take risks and the capacity to do things differently, or the permission to do things differently, and the support is more there. But that has to be ingrained from quite young, because actually, otherwise our kids are still going to be following the same path, because that's the path, that's, the conditioning that's set out in the way that society works right now. And so, for example, for me, I think, how do we teach our kids to have more courage to try things differently and do things differently, so that they grow up with that sense of like, oh, okay, well, I did this and it didn't work, so I'm going to do things a different way, and then try that and it didn't work. But how do you teach that? How do you teach them curiosity and courage? And
I mean, for me, part of it, I genuinely think the thing is we just have to not beat it out of kids. I think it's actually innate very often, and it can be cultivated. It might need cultivating. I think that's one of the things. It's these things can be too much sometimes.
But then they're still in the path. They still get to the end of school, and then it's like, which university are you going to, and then which job are you going to get?
This is what I mean. I think the system that we currently have doesn't help cultivate. In fact, it's the opposite. It kind of squashes these abilities, or like teaches kids to use other things. And to some degree, I think there's in terms of what we can do personally around this, there's definitely encouraging this and supporting this in others and ourselves. And I think that's, there's a close relationship between these things. And for a lot of people, certainly a lot of people who are, if you're listening to this and you're like, kind of, you feel some of this on a kind of deep level, I think part of the do what you know assumption means that we think we need to have all the answers before we start kind of working with other people around this. And that can make it feel very lonely and kind of gets quite stuck. And one of the things I'm coming to understand is that we almost can't get all the answers. It's an ongoing exploration. And it's a lot easier when we can work with others in the exploration. And actually there's some value there. We don't have to just, we can invite others to support our exploration and explore with us. And that's a very different way of thinking about some of this stuff. But it is there sometimes. It's not systematized and straightforward yet, and I would very much like that to be the case, but it is potentially there. And I think because of this assumption, certainly for me personally, I still have some resistance to inviting support for stuff that I'm not certain about, and for the exploratory stuff. And this show itself is an example. It's partly why I do it.
Because you've got to be brave, because you're doing things differently, and you've got to be brave, and that's challenging, because we're still. It goes back to this, it's like none of us are experts, but we're having a go, and actually the point is having a go. And if you look at like the emergent learning model, which is gaining ground, and emergent leadership, but those models of allowing things to go where they want to go, which is then some really interesting and wonderful things come out of it, and sometimes it goes in a funny direction, but emergent really challenge people's idea of how things should be, transition towns is one of the part of the sustainability movement that I'm really interested in, and it's based on permaculture principles, and it's essentially an initiative to enable communities to wean themselves off oil and become more resilient to energy shocks. And it's a really fascinating and wonderful initiative, and it's been going for quite a few years now. And part of the model is, you do the training to then take the initiative to your own community, to then start a transition initiative in your own community. But the essence of it is that it's a non-hierarchical structure of creative input, and it's a very emergent leadership model. So the thing wants to happen, but how it happens is very much based on who brings what and how it drives. And it's not about one person being in charge and saying, okay, guys, I've brought this thing and this is what we're going to do, and you're all going to do this, and your job is this and your job is this. It doesn't work like that. It works very much an emergent way. And we started it, and there was a lot of, in the beginning, there was a lot of energy around it. But as it was apparent, it became apparent that there was no clear traditional structure of what essentially people had known as a normal structure of an organizational thing. They just didn't really know how to, it lost its power. It lost its, because people wanted the traditional, be a person in leadership, tell me what to do, give me a job, and let's get this thing done. But it doesn't work like that. For many reasons, everything's put on one person. But essentially, that the new models of like emergent learning, emergent leadership, it's still a structure that's not familiar, and so it's not going the way we think it should. It's not going the way we know it would. But how do you teach that? How do you show that? How do you it's almost like before the initiative begins, you need training in what emergent learning is, or it's not going to be the way you know it. But
it does feel like there's a different set of skills here. And I think for me, one of the things that comes up is I think there are certain people I speak to and meet, and actually a lot of people I work with, who have more skills in this space than they think they do.
Mm-hmm.
Who are used to navigating these uncertainties and working within this space. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason.
For you?
Sorry?
What are the skills for you that you think that are more needed?
I think one of the things is working in context, is understanding context and establishing context, including personal context. So there's something big around reflexivity, being able to reflect on one's own experience and one's own position in relationship to what you're saying, to expertise, to your knowledge, to your formal knowledge. Because that's one of the big problems with this, is this idea of like universal truths. It's like, yeah, well, we haven't found one yet. Maybe you found one, but you'd be the first.
Yeah.
And I think how we work with that, how we reflect on our own capacity, how we do these experiments in ways that make sense, in ways that work, that let us test things out in small ways. A lot of what's really interesting for me is how these principles work in different domains, and actually quite a lot of practitioners have some skills in these. I think of reading about permaculture is so interesting because so much of it crosses over with agile development for me. Like so many of the principles are in common, and actually understanding where we have these skills and where we can cross over the domains. So I think for me it is about like knowing how to break something down into small testable amount, like small things that can test and explore. How do you develop this instead of having to build this? And the difficulty is we're trained in doing things a certain way, and there's fundamentally a skill in shifting those. How do you transition? How do you arrange? How do you shift something? And a lot of this isn't really teachable in the conventional sense, but it is very educable.
Learning by doing.
And I think that giving ourselves the opportunity to learn by doing giving other people the opportunity to learn by doing with us, and understanding that we don't have to have all the answers, and this idea of working out loud. I'm really, and I also, again, if I connect it back with digital, I think, the open source movement's a pretty good example of a lot of these principles. You're developing in public, you're showing stuff, you're asking people for support,
iterations. Yeah.
iterating and building, and instead of being, okay, we need to know how all this looks at the end. Okay, what's the next step? We have an idea of the direction we want to go in, but we're not trying to work out all the details about, like, in every single step to get to there. We're just working out what the next step is, and the next step. I think the other side of the practice skills is that there are essentially probably right on the border of what I'd even call skills. They're kind of how we work emotionally with this stuff, how we work, how we can relate to this stuff, our ability to be compassionate to ourselves, particularly when we're working with this stuff, our ability, how we treat ourselves when we make mistakes. Those are
really
important skills. Because if we're
totally
really violent, mean to ourselves when we make mistakes, this work is going to be incredibly hard. And I say that from personal experience. That's an edge for me.
Giving ourselves permission to fail. That's the point. Just, failing and getting back up again, and that's a skill. And it's a whole human approach. It's not just, doing things differently. It's not just about, following a different path intellectually. It's holistic, it's emotional, it's all of it has to be taken into account. How we approach it, how we perceive, how the language that we use with ourselves, how we feel has to be taken into account, because essentially that's part of the journey of why we've got to where we are now. And it doesn't work because we've not been taken into account what's going on here. We've just been going from here. And actually, when you take everything into account, that's where we're taking our whole self forward.
I think that, that focus of, instead of just focusing on one thing, and trying to maximize that, what do we know? What are we certain about? How can we be as certain as possible? Instead, it's not about, and I think this is one of the interesting things, is when you talk about this, it becomes this thing of, what are we maximizing instead? Instead of being what if everything hit a threshold of good, rather than one thing hit a threshold of maximum? And that's a very, very different conversation.
Good enough for now.
Enough for now, exactly. And allowing the enough for now. Instead of needing to have more, know more, be in that position of finishedness.
Much more permission for exploration and experimentation, innovation, doing things differently.
I genuinely think a lot of that starts with the permission we grant ourselves. That's often the hardest area, or and it's the area we have responsibility, in the sense that we can respond in that area. We can make, that's a space we can work in, giving ourselves permission to do this. I think that, doing things you don't know but are attracted to, being willing to be crap at something because you've just started, and also being willing to do that, at least to some degree, in view, in public, is a huge thing. And again, a huge thing I find quite difficult. But that, that willingness to explore, there will be dead ends, there will be kind of unexpected things to trip over, and that's not just part of the, an avoidable drawback. It's actually part of the thing. It improves the whole process.
It's testing.
Part of the system. Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got to be able to do that. We've got to give ourselves the freedom to do that. Just testing and iterating and, you know, following your nose. And it's the only way to find out what works and what doesn't work is to try it, is to have a go. You know.
So I think, you know, if we're the need to do what you know is that there is some value in that. You know, there is something in not always doing something completely different, because I do have that drive as well. You know, like part of my difficulty is like just never do the same thing again. But doing, and again, this idea of like it's not a binary actually. That's what's I think, you know, we're not talking about there's stuff you know and stuff you don't know. There's a huge space between what we know for sure and what we don't know at all. That is uncertainty. That whole space. And actually, it's about allowing that what we do know, we can use and work with, and allowing ourselves to work with that. And at the same time, not being worried that means that there's some stuff we don't know as well. And that we can combine
also
understanding
exactly. It's not just this is what I know and this is what I don't know, and they don't meet. It's like, okay, this is what I know and this is the context it's been in up until now. How about if I shift the context, take what I know but apply it slightly differently, allow myself to explore something new that's out of context, but it's still, you know, playing with what essentially I know. Then, you know, what happens then, where if I give myself permission to just take this side road with my stuff, you know?
Yeah. And knowing that you can always go back. You're not completely lost. You're not taking a complete jump into just complete the unknown, entirely unknown. But that you can explore the edges, and allowing yourself to kind of be in those the edges. I think that for me, it feels like the huge thing. And also for those of us who have a particular taste for working in this space, I speak for myself, and I speak for a lot of people that work in coaching innovation, I think, as well. So is understanding that there is a particular value in the skills, in being a skillful walker of these edges, being able to navigate these edge spaces and the overlaps and the uncertainty, because there are kind of and being able to letting yourself cultivating that itself as a domain of practice, a domain of skill, and inviting others to join you in it.
Yeah, that's very much where I'm at, is holding space for people in that edge space, you know, because I think that's, for me, helping people connect to the courage in themselves is a real joy, because that's where, you know, helping people be in the edge and stay in the edge. And at first that's scary, but as courage grows, then, you know, and all that people need in that space is just to be held. And it's like, it's okay, everything's going to be okay. One way or another, everything's going to be okay. That's the job of a coach, you know. That's why I love it so much. That's why I love doing it. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think that you know, that makes a really good point. If people want to get in touch with you or work with you or find out more about you, we have a link to your website in the show notes. But do you want to say a little bit more about what you're up to, how people might engage?
Yeah. Well, for the moment, I am doing a bi-weekly newsletter where I'm sharing information on what's happening with the climate, resources on learning more, but also resources on self-growth stuff, you know, and cultivating ourselves in response to what's going on. And my where I really want to be able to help people is not only holding the space right now for what's going on and conversation spaces, hoping to start up a bi-weekly Zoom room, I guess, just having conversations about what's going on with the planet and how we feel about it, because I think that there's quite a lot of uncertainty and, what do I do now? What's next? So I'd like to do that, but also helping people who, they want to do more and they want to change what they're doing, and whether that's in their work now or actually wanting to change direction completely, but who are really compelled to channel their work into being more of service to the climate emergency, then that's where I want to help. So whether that's group coaching or one-to-one or, just get in touch. There's a link on my website, and inviting people to just join a conversation, have a call with me, and, see what it is that you want to do and where you want to put yourself and how I can help do that.
Thank you. And I think in my own experience, I found one of the challenges of kind of being led to like doing exploratory work is that you almost can't find people that fit the same categories as you in that way, because no one does exactly the same weird mash, like combination of different things, and and that adapting what we know already, and we've done, we've got this formal thing, and how we can bring that. But so there's no one. It can feel like it can feel very lonely in that way. And my experience has been actually just finding other people who are exploring in similar directions and in similar ways, even if they're bringing different things and doing different things, actually is incredibly helpful. So, yeah.
And just connecting and having a conversation. It's emergent right now. It's going where it wants to go, and it will be what it needs to be in terms of what people want and what people need. But essentially, it's providing that space to bring people together who, are in the same place as all of us. What do we do next, and where do we go, and how? So, yeah.
No, that's absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for first of all for doing that, because I think it's really important work, and second of all for being on the show. Really enjoyed our conversation. Yeah, really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining us, and thank you in the audience as well for watching, and for everyone who commented and engaged, and I really do hope it got you thinking. So yeah, please do reach out and ask either me or Lucy, or just get that conversation going, I think, and start thinking, and if it sparked conversation with anyone else for you, please do share it, start that conversation, just have that conversation, because that feels like a really important way to kind of spread that out. And it's a great way to support the show as well, if you would like to do so, to just share bits that made you think, bits that maybe don't have an answer for you yet, but just kind of sparked some curiosity. That would be brilliant. So it really is your support that makes, at least legitimizes my having interesting exploratory conversations with really interesting people, like today. At least it does that. So yeah, thank you. And you can find upcoming and past episodes on YouTube and LinkedIn. And if you search for Delightful Dissent on your favorite podcast platform, you'll find currently some very out of date episodes, though excitingly, Delightful Dissent does have a new home that's not quite ready yet, but it does have a new home. So hopefully very soon we'll actually be catching up with all of those episodes and available to share more widely. Speaking of the next episode, I'm going to be talking to Sam Curtis, who is a coach and meditation teacher. And we're going to be talking about the idea that I should meditate. And I think this is a really, particularly after today, this one, there's so many people recommending meditation, including getting up at 4:30 in the morning to meditate. That ain't happening. And it will make you more productive or whatever. And I'm not really sure that whether or not it does, whether productivity is the reason to meditate. And even if it does, actually doing it by all these conventional ways can be a huge struggle. So I'm really looking forward to exploring a bit more around this idea and like this particular kind of this assumption around the morals of it, aside from anything else. It feels like it's something we we should do and are judged if we don't. So it's very much in this do what you know kind of category, and the ways that we do it. So yeah, really looking forward to that one too. And that's going to be at 1 p.m. UK time on Wednesday, the 1st of February. So I very much hope to see you then. But in the meantime, please do go out there and make some delightful dissent of your own. Thanks and goodbye.